back. So sorry about that last one. I'm sure you don't appreciate making code and then deleting it. But we really had to delete it for two reasons, right? So one was that it was just a plain old view controller with a table in it, right? So if I scroll back to it here, it was just a plain view controller that happened to have a table in it. Whereas what we want to do is we want to start using what's called a table view controller. And that's a view controller that only has a table in it. And there are a few special things you get if you go ahead and declare that you're a table view controller. So for example, like, you have the keyboard pop up, it automatically moves the table up to take into account for that. It also does some things with the scroll thing on the right. And anytime you have only a table in your view, you really would rather be a table view controller. So we had to delete it for that reason. The other big reason we had to get rid of it is that it didn't base itself on a navigation controller, right? So there would have been no good way to drill down into it. I mean, there's things you could do, but it was just kind of set up wrong from the get-go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of start over again, and we're going to start off on the right foot and not necessarily the simple foot, right? It's not hard, but it's just not as simple as it was last time. And we're going to try to get to the point in this video of actually getting a list of movie quotes to show up. So here I've got a couple movie quotes. So go ahead and create a new file to start things off. So go back into your project, right click on this, say new file, Cocoa Touch class, just like before. And instead of making a view controller, make a table view controller. And then the name of this, I'm going to call it MovieQuotes, plural, table view controller. So MovieQuotes table view controller, subclass of table view controller, again for Swift. So go ahead and click on next and save it in the default location. And once it comes up, I mean, you'll see that it's a subclass of this. It'll actually stub in a bunch of methods, right? So there's all kinds of things. There's did receive memory warning, which I mean, I never really care about in this class. Number of sections in the table, number of rows in the table, and then there's a bunch of things that are commented out that it thinks that you might want. In fact, we actually will want most of these. I think the only ones we're not going to do, if you want to kill them now, you can. The move row at index path, the can move row, we're not going to move rows, so you can delete that. I mean, feel free to know that that's a feature you could use someday, but we're not going to do it in this example. So it's got a bunch of these stubs of things that it thinks that you're going to want, right? So this is kind of all set there. So let's go ahead and go over to the storyboard, and let's make a table view controller and mark this as its custom class. So I'm going to go into my storyboard, and what I want to do is I want to drop on a navigation controller. So if I just start typing the word navigation controller, I'll go ahead and drop it on. What it's going to do is it's going to actually cheat a little bit. And I say it's going to cheat a little bit because it's going to make a navigation controller, which is the thing on the left here, but then it's going to also make UI table view controller, and that is cheating, and it makes a segue between them, and it makes a connection between the two as well. I guess it's not a segue, that's a connection. But the reason it does this is because it's very, very common to have as your root view controller of your navigation controller be a table, right? It's so common, in fact, that when you drop it over, it made it for you. And in fact, it's so common for a table to have prototypes, it actually made that for you as well. So it cheated a little bit. You said you wanted a navigation controller, and it gave you some more stuff too. It actually did that with a toolbar when you brought it in. It put a button on it, right? So not really any different than that. And so this root view controller, what I want to do is I want to say, hey, you're not just any old view controller. So you can see right now it's just kind of a generic table view controller. We want to select our MovieQuotes table view controller. Note that it's only in the list because it is a table view controller. So I made that change, which was great. What I also want to do is I want to change the text on this thing, and I want to say movie quotes, plural, and hit enter. Now what kind of annoys me is it really should have changed over here on the left where it says root view controller. It should have really changed that to say movie quotes. I'm not quite sure why it didn't do that. It sure seems like it should have. Maybe if I leave and come back, it'll fix it. It's annoying me, so I'm actually going to quit Xcode and then bring it back up. To be honest, Xcode, it kind of used to be really stable, and I feel like it's getting a little less stable as the years progress, because you can see there, once I closed it and reopened it, it's back. So I'm not sure what that bug was all about. But it was annoying me, so I knew how to fix it. All right, so we've got movie quotes, the table view controller, great. the next thing we want to do is we want to start setting up its prototype table view cell. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the prototype, and what I want to do here is I want to set its ID. Note there's this thing called restoration ID. That is not what you want. You want to go into the attributes. You want to set its type. I'm going to set it to basic for right now. Later we'll change it to subtitle, but basic is what we want right here. And its reuse identifier, I'm just going to go ahead and say MovieQuote cell. So singular MovieQuote, because it's going to show one MovieQuote cell. And then I'm kind of, obsessive compulsive about this. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that right now, put it on my clipboard. And since that has to match exactly in code, I'm just going to go make a constant for MovieQuote cell identifier. I like to add the word identifier, I'm not sure why. And that equals that string that I've got on my clipboard. So MovieQuote cell. So later when I need to reference it, I don't have to worry about what name I did it. So that's just my pattern, right? Great, so we've got our table view controller, our prototype cell. I did forget one thing, and if you zoom out, maybe you can look at my screen and tell me what it is. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And that's that there's no little arrow over here. That's because I didn't set the initial view controller. If I'd run the app, it would crash, and it would say, perhaps you forgot to set your initial view controller. It's kind of a very pompous message. And so I need to go in here. I've seen it before, right? And I need to check mark is initial view controller, and then I've got my arrow to start things up. Interestingly enough, you can actually run the app right now. So they stubbed in enough methods to get rid of the syntax errors, and it actually runs, which, I don't know, I think that's kind of fun that it runs. There's no rows, but that's kind of expected. So let's go fix that issue. So let's go over into our code. So I'm going to go my MovieQuotes table view controller. And if you look at these things, you can see why there's no rows, right? So first off, there's how many sections are there, and it says there are 0 sections. We don't want that, right? In fact, we want 1 section, and 1 is actually the default. So it turns out that instead of typing 1, you can just delete the method number of sections. I can just delete that one. And then the next question is, how many rows are there in the section? And it passes me out of section, but I know it's going to be a 1. And so that we could type in a number here. Now, to be honest, usually you don't type in a number. Usually, you're basing it on some data object. The most common type of data object based on is an array. So what I'm going to do to just kind of start things off here is I'm just going to make myself a constant array. I mean, usually they're mutable, but this one I know is a constant, so I'm going to say let instead of var. And go ahead and make yourself a short array of strings. I'm going to do the thing that I always do, and that's use the names of the people in my family as my array. You can use whatever names you would like, but a little string or array of strings is a good thing. So my number of rows is just equal to names.count. You'll also notice there's a little message here that says warning incomplete method. I'm going to take that away because I just implemented it. In fact, while I'm in a deleting mood, I don't find this comment that necessary. Number of rows in the section. I mean, that's the name of the method. Number of rows in section, right? So I don't really need that. I'm going to get rid of that too. So that's the basics. Then if you want to actually do anything, you also need to configure the cell. And sure enough, the next thing they've got ready for you here, if you just kind of uncomment the comments around the outside, is cell for row at index path. Perfect. The things that are in here is DQ reusable cell with identifier. They had to stub in something here, so they just put a string for reuse identifier. If you leave that, it'll crash your app, right? Because our reuse identifier is called MovieQuote cell identifier. So we've got a variable for it, which goes to the string, which is nice. I guess it's a constant. They already took care of the casting for you, and they wrote configure the cell right here, right? So just the same things we did in the last example. So one simple thing that we could do is we could take the text label text, and we could set it equal to whatever item we have at this index path. So if we say index path.row, what that'll do is that'll pull from our list of names a current index. And so it should work to print Dave, Christy, McKinley, Keegan, Bowen with just these 2 small changes. So if I go ahead and run it again here, presto, you can see I've got my list. I can click on things. By default, when something is selected, it shows it in this gray text in the current version of iOS, and that's great. Now, our real goal is to show movie quotes here, but just to kind of take a short detour, I just wanted to point out that there's a ton of methods that you can work with table views. Just to kind of point out a bunch that we're not going to use later. So there's did select row at index path. This one's specifically for the delegate, not the data source. But it's really handy to, respond to clicks, right? So that's something you want to do a lot. So we'll just print out a message. You just pressed on, and I'll just go ahead and say names, index path dot row, and so just go ahead and print that out. Oops, missing a parenthesis. And so that's an example of one. And so, I mean, if you run it now, then whenever you click on them, it says you just press Keegan, you just press Bowen, you just press Christie. You get the idea. I love that we're back in Swift and we don't have that like complete timestamp. I hated that stupid timestamp. It just prints it. That's all I really wanted. So that's cool. There's a bunch of other methods. I mean, you could go through and you could learn about table views forever. So I mean, there's things that like set how high it is. So it's like what's the height for a row at index path, and if you return something gigantic and then ran it, you would get gigantically tall cells, right? So there's just all kinds of things that you can do, which is kind of fun. It turns out that neither of these are important to this app, so I'm going to delete them. If you'd like to comment them out as a reference, that's fine. I don't need the reference. I'm going to delete them. I just wanted to kind of tell you they exist. So what I really wanted to do next was actually make these rows be for movie quotes, right? So here we've got a movie quote, things like that. So what I want to do is I want to actually make a class for movie quotes, and it's going to be a really simple class. So here's the entirety of this class. So it's going to be movie quote. It's going to be a subclass of NS object, and this is going to be exactly what's in there. So let's just go ahead and knock that out real quick. So right click in here, new file, Cocoa Touch class. I'm going to call it movie quote singular. It's going to be a subclass of NS object, and it's going to be in Swift, which is great. Saving it into the default location. And then we're going to start making this class. So hopefully your brain is good at getting back into Swift instead of Objective-C. But we're going to say that there's a quote, which is a string. And then we're going to say that there's a movie, which is a string. And then we're going to say that there's an initializer, which takes a quote, which is a string, and a movie, which is a string. And no shock, it's going to say self.quote equals quote, and it's going to say self.movie equals movie. There's not a lot of times where you have to say self.dot in Swift. I mean, one time is like in constructors where you have a local variable and an instance variable that have the same name. You want to avoid shadowing. You also have to say self.dot a lot inside a closure, but other than that, you don't say self much. So that's a pretty easy class, which is kind of nice. Back over in the table view controller, instead of names, what I want to do is I want to make a variable called movie quotes. So we'll make it plural. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and create an empty array right now. The thing that I like about names, I'm done with you, right? Thanks for your help. The nice thing about arrays and just go ahead and make them right now is you don't have to worry about optionals at all. So it just is always present, which is nice. Whereas if you just declared it without creating it, you'd have to worry about optionals, which I do not want to mess with. And so instead of saying names.count, I'm just going to say movie quotes .count. And then down here, instead of just setting it equal to the actual thing, I'm going to do it in two steps, right? So I'm going to say let movie quotes equal movie quotes index path dot row. So I'm just going to pull out the movie quotes from the movie quotes array, and then on the movie quotes singular, I'm going to set the quote to be what's shown in the text label. In addition to the quote, I would also like to show the movie. The movie is going to go into the detail text label, and so that's going to show the movie. So that's great. I'm going to be able to show two things, which is fun. You'll notice that this isn't optional right here because it's got a question mark for a reason. That's because you may not have a detail text label. In fact, if I tried to run it right now, we wouldn't have one. And that's because of my storyboard is what set up that prototype cell. So I've got that prototype cell here. And what I'd really like to do with it is instead of making it basic, so if I go ahead and click on it, why is it not letting me click on it? I wasn't at 100%. Instead of basic, I want subtitle. And if it's a subtitle, then it's going to have a text label and a detailed text label. So that's great. So I could run it now, and it would work. The only problem is that it would be an empty array, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to put some things into the array just to kind of get the ball rolling. So I'm going to put them into this view did load area. Most of this stuff in view did load I can get rid of. I'm going to keep that bottom line because we're going to do something like that here in a little bit. So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to say MovieQuotes.append, and I'd like to make a new movie quote for whatever movie you'd like to make. So here you go. I'll say I'll be back, which was from the Terminator, and then I'll go ahead and do a second one as well. I like short quotes just because it's less for me to type. Feel free to be creative, right? Put in any old quote you'd want. Another one that I remembered from the notes is Yo Adrian from Rocky, right? And again, I only picked those because they were easy for me to type and nice and short. So if I run it now, it should load this thing up. And sure enough, it's got an array of my movie quotes. It's got the two that I've pre-populated, so I've appended these two. And everything works hunky-dory, right? So it's set up with that subtitle. I like the subtitle because it looks pretty good by default out of the box, and that's a lot of fun. Cool, so that was actually our goal and objective for this time. We just wanted to make sure that we could actually create and display some quotes. So as far as our CRUD methods go, we have not yet done create. We have done read, so this is a read of our data. And of course, we have not done update or delete yet, so they'll be coming later. So that's it for this time. Come back next time, and we'll start working on actually creating a movie quote. See you then.